What's the most brutal but true thing you ever said to your ex? I remember the exact moment those words left my lips, how they shattered the silence between us and turned everything we'd built into dust. I remember the way my heart pounded as if it might crack my ribs, how I couldn't look at him for a second after I said it. In that instant, I knew there would be no going back, that whatever we had was done. But in some twisted way, that was also the moment I started to breathe freely. It was the moment I stopped living for someone else's idea of me. That's the cruel paradox of truth, I guess. It sets you free, but first it tears apart everything around you. And the man standing across from me, the one who used to make me believe in warmth and safety, was now staring back at me as though he'd never seen me before. His name was Eric. Mine's Amanda. And the words I said to him that day, well, I'll get to that in a minute, though I'm sure you can guess they were brutal enough to scar us both. I hadn't planned on being so vicious. For so long, I was the quiet one, the person who swallowed every ounce of anger, every moment of despair, burying it all beneath a surface-level smile. Maybe that's why he never saw it coming. Maybe that's why I never saw it coming. But it's weird how you wake up one day and realize you've reached a point where the weight of everything unspoken becomes suffocating. And then, the moment you exhale that truth, it explodes. We met in Boston. I was 23, trying to figure myself out and mostly failing. My friend Dana dragged me to a rooftop party she insisted would be full of successful, interesting people who might give me leads on some job prospects. I was fresh out of college with a double major in English, lit in communications, a combination that impressed absolutely nobody who was paying real salaries. But hey, it was a mild September evening, and I needed a break from scanning job boards in my depressing little studio apartment. So I put on a half-decent outfit, practiced a smile in the mirror, and followed Dana through a labyrinth of narrow streets until we reached this swanky condo building overlooking the city skyline. I remember the rooftops' twinkling fairy lights, the faint hum of an acoustic band playing in the corner, and people swirling wine as though we'd all stepped into some polished scene from a movie. It felt too sophisticated for me. Dana whispered conspiratorially that the guy who organized these gatherings was some startup founder who loved to bring interesting strangers together. So I scanned the faces, wondering which ones belonged to hungry entrepreneurs and which were living off generational wealth. That's when I first noticed Eric. He was standing near the edge of the rooftop, looking out at the high-rises with a half-smirk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Black hair, tall build, suit jacket, slung casually over a t-shirt. I couldn't help thinking he looked out of place, like he'd rather be anywhere else. Dana nudged me with her elbow. That's Eric Vaughn, she whispered. He's some hotshot in finance. A bit of a lone wolf, but rumor is he's brilliant. I rolled my eyes at the theatrics, but part of me was curious. And then, as if sensing my gaze, he turned around, caught my eye, and raised his glass in silent greeting. That was the moment that kicked off everything that followed. The good, the bad, and the heartbreak. We ended up talking for hours that night, slipping away from the small talk about startups and hedge funds, diving into random tangents about music, family backgrounds, and weird childhood memories. Eric told me about growing up in Vermont, about how he used to fish in a creek near his grandparents' cabin, and how he'd always wanted to see more of the world beyond that rural bubble. I told him about my obsession with 19th century American literature and my desperate fear that I'd become an adult with no real accomplishments, drifting from job to job. He laughed and reassured me that, from what he could see, I'd find my path soon. I'd never had a stranger express so much confidence in me. It was exhilarating. He offered to share a taxi when we left, and I ended up letting him walk me to my apartment building. He didn't even try to come up, just said goodnight with that soft half-smile and disappeared into the city lights. I stood on the curb after he left, heart hammered, feeling like something big had just happened. Our early days were sweet, in that dizzy, unstoppable way new love can be. We had coffee dates that bled into lunches that turned into long walks by the river, and sometimes I'd find myself in his office building late at night, waiting for him to finish a conference call so we could grab dinner. He took me to fancy restaurants that made my head spin, introduced me to friends who talked about investments and marketing trends, which bored me to tears but also intrigued me because it was also different from my usual crowd. I had this sense of stepping into another world, one where people used money to open any door they wanted. I was too naive to realize that just because you can open doors doesn't mean you'll be happy about what's inside. Still, Eric was different with me. He'd quiet down after a long day, let me read him bits of poetry I'd scrawled in my notebook. He listened, or at least pretended to, with an attentiveness I found irresistible. I started to think, maybe, just maybe, I'd found someone who saw me not as a flighty, jobless dreamer, but as a real person with depth and potential. I guess that's what we do in the honeymoon phase. We see what we want to see, Ignore the jagged edges that might hurt us later. My friends were thrilled for me, especially Dana, who took credit for the introduction. I had a few acquaintances. Raise eyebrows, though. People who said things like, Eric Vaughn? Heard he's kind of controlling. Or, I heard he once broke up with a girl because she put on a little weight. It was all gossip, or so I assumed. I wanted to believe the best in him because he made me feel special. He'd show up with a bouquet of white lilies, my favorite, and I'd forget whatever weird comment he might have made the night before. He'd apologize if he snapped at me after a tough day at work, blaming stress. It all felt forgivable in the glow of new love. But as our relationship evolved, cracks appeared. They always do, right? Nobody is perfect, and I certainly wasn't. I was insecure about not having a solid career path. He was impatient with anything that didn't move forward fast enough. At first, it was small. He'd get testy if I was running late or if I changed dinner. Plans last minute. He'd roll his eyes when I mentioned wanting to write a novel, telling me I should focus on something more practical. I'd shrug it off, telling myself he just cared about my success. And sometimes, yeah, his drive was motivational for me. He encouraged me to apply for a copywriting job in a marketing firm downtown, and I ended up landing the position. I wanted to believe he'd done that out of genuine support. But later on, it started to feel like he wanted me to fit a mold that made sense to him, so that I'd be a neat addition to his life. A girlfriend who was artistic but also stable, not too chaotic. Someone who'd look good on his arm at corporate events. We stayed together. We moved in together. We started sharing groceries, routines, Netflix queues, the everyday. Closeness might have been comforting if it weren't for the constant undercurrent of tension. Eric wanted me to be more polished. He'd drop hints about my clothes, my hair, the way I spoke in front of his associates. If I slipped into slang or cussed too casually, he'd tense up. At first, I'd just wave it off. But over time, it wore me down. Like water dripping on a stone. I started to doubt every little thing about myself. My sense of humor, my fashion sense, my taste in music. Even my friends. He never explicitly said my friends were beneath him, but he'd go quiet whenever I invited them over, as if he couldn't wait for them to leave. I grew self-conscious, feeling like the only way to keep the peace was to contort myself into whatever version of me he preferred. Dana noticed. She pulled me aside one night after we'd gone out for drinks and asked, "Are you sure you're happy? You seem different." I snapped at her, told her she was imagining things, but deep down, I knew she was right. I had changed. There was this subtle fear in me all the time, a fear of not meeting Eric's standards, of losing him, of failing as a... And maybe part of me liked being shaped by, as if he was some mentor figure who'd help me become more successful. I didn't see how toxic that dynamic was until much, much later. One night, about a year into our relationship, we had a huge argument. It started over something trivial. He accused me of putting the dishes in the dishwasher the wrong way, which escalated into him complaining about how I never did anything right, how unorganized and naive I was. He even said something like, "God, sometimes it's like dating a teenager." I fired back that I was trying my best, that not everything has to be done according to his plan. The words just escalated, bigger and crueler, until he slammed the dishwasher shut and stormed out of the apartment. I remember standing there, shaking, tears burning my eyes, wondering what had happened to the sweet man who once listened to me read poetry. He returned hours later, reeking of whiskey, and fell asleep on the couch. By morning, I was still furious, but he apologized, made breakfast, and we pretended everything was fine. That was our pattern. Hard fights, quick band apologies, and zero real resolution. Every time I shoved my resentments deeper, praying they wouldn't surface again. But they always did, in new and uglier ways. There was also the matter of his constant flirting with other women. He insisted it was harmless, that he was just being friendly with female colleagues, but I caught glimpses of text messages that hinted otherwise. Once I confronted him about a coworker named Jessica who sent him a message saying, "I missed last night already." He said it was an inside joke, that I was overreacting, that they'd just had a late dinner meeting. I didn't believe him, but I didn't have proof of anything beyond emotional betrayal. Maybe I was too scared to face the possibility that I was with a cheater. The real turning point came another year later, when we were visiting his parents for Thanksgiving in Vermont. It was supposed to be a peaceful holiday, a chance for me to bond with his family. I spent the days before the trip poring over recipes, wanting to make a good impression. But as soon as we arrived, I saw the weight of his father's expectations on him and the annoyance flickering in his mother's eyes whenever I tried to help. In the kitchen, she was a retired surgeon, used to having things done her way. She hovered over my shoulder, criticizing every chop of the knife. Eric, instead of supporting, joined in her gentle mockery. "Amanda, you really should just let Mom handle the gravy," he said at one point, grinning that smug grin. I forced a laugh, but I wanted to scream. My face burned with humiliation, and I felt so small. At dinner, conversation turned to our future plans. His father asked when we'd get engaged, and Eric just shrugged, saying something like, "When Amanda grows up a bit." Everyone laughed, as if it was just a harmless joke. But inside, I felt a snap. I was tired of being the punchline, the silly girl who never measured up. I didn't start a scene that night, but I didn't forget. I swallowed the bitterness, let it fester, let it churn into something dark and furious. On the drive home, Eric barely spoke to me. He was stressed about work, about some deal he was trying to close. I stared out the window, imagining 1,000 different ways to break free, or at least imagining that I would someday. Weeks went by, and the tension between us kept growing. He'd get home late, sometimes without explanation. Other times, he expected me to read his mind about what kind of dinner he wanted. I started sleeping in the living room, claiming I was up late writing. In truth, I just couldn't bear to be near him. One night, while I was curled up on the couch with my laptop, I heard his phone buzz on the coffee table. I don't know what compelled me to look, but I did. There it was. Another text from Jessica, laced with innuendo, about a conference trip they were planning. My stomach clenched. I scrolled further, numb, reading flirtatious messages, half-naked selfies she'd sent, and his encouraging replies. I felt physically ill. All that time, I'd been suspicious, but seeing it in print was like a punch in the gut. I confronted him immediately, phone in hand, tears streaming down my face. He denied nothing, just said, "It's not a big deal, Amanda. It's not like I love her. People flirt. Grow up." And that's when I realized this wasn't some minor mistake. He genuinely thought what he was doing was fine, that my hurt was just me, being childish. I told him if he didn't end it, I was leaving. He smirked, said, "So leave." But I didn't. I didn't have the guts. My job wasn't stable, my savings were low, and I still clung to the hope that somehow we could fix this. We pretended to patch things up, but my trust was gone. The anger in me swelled daily, especially as Eric continued to critique everything about me. My friends, my clothes, my slow progress at work. He wanted me to be some perfect corporate girlfriend, accomplished yet docile, while he did whatever he pleased. One night, after too many glasses of wine, I told him I felt like I was living in a glass cage, performing for him and his social circle. He just shrugged, said I was being melodramatic. The final straw, where I spoke the words that broke us, happened at a holiday party hosted by his firm. It was supposed to be a classy event, with everyone decked out in expensive suits and dresses. I wore this silver gown I'd spent half my paycheck on, wanting to impress. The minute we arrived, Eric introduced to a group of colleagues and then vanished, off to do his rounds of casual flirting and brag about his latest successes. I tried to mingle, but I felt out of place among all the hedge fund talk and private equity boasts. Every time I saw him across the room, he was leaning in too close to some new woman, laughing at jokes I knew he didn't find funny. Halfway through the night, I decided to slip away and find some fresh air on the balcony. The city lights stretched below, but instead of feeling inspired, I felt hollow. All I could think was, this is my life. Now, standing on the sidelines while he lives it up, ignoring me, my eyes stung. That was when Eric came. Outside, probably to escape some conversation. He saw me and frowned, like my presence was an inconvenience. He made some remark about how I should network instead of pouting in corners. And that was it. The dam burst. I told him I was sick of feeling like a decorative piece in his life, an accessory. I said I was tired of waiting for him to treat me like a partner instead of a project or a nuisance. He tried to hush me, glancing around to see if anyone was listening. That only fueled my anger. I can't even recall everything. I screamed, but I know the final line. The one that came out with venom was, "You never loved me. You only ever loved yourself in my reflection." I saw his face go white, and for a split second he looked actually wounded. His jaw clenched, and I realized I'd stabbed him right where it hurt, his ego. The air felt electric. I heard the distant hum of holiday music from inside, but we stood frozen in that cold winter night, locked in a moment that spelled the end. He hissed, "Shut up, Amanda." But I kept going, tears and fury swirling together. I should have left a long time ago, but I kept hoping you'd be the man I first thought you were. I see now that man never existed. The look in his eyes was pure rage, but beneath it, I detected fear. Fear that I was right, that he truly was incapable of loving me in any real sense. We glared at each other for what felt like forever, until the party host stepped onto the balcony to see if we were okay. Without a word, Eric stormed back inside, leaving me there, breathless and trembling, but weirdly, with a sense of clarity I'd never felt. I grabbed my coat, left the party, and walked through the snowy streets alone. That night, I crashed at Dana's place, sobbing uncontrollably, the adrenaline still coursing through me. Dana kept saying, "It's going to be okay. You did the right thing. But I was terrified. Terrified of life after Eric, of being alone, of having burned every bridge. Yet a small part of me felt relief, like I'd finally given voice to the truth I'd been swallowing for too long. The next morning, I got a text from Eric. No apology, just, we need to talk. I ignored it. Over the next few days, I stayed with Dana and confided the full story. His criticisms, the flirting, my insecurities, the Thanksgiving debacle. She was furious on my behalf. She convinced me to go to my apartment when Eric was at work and gather my things. I remember stepping inside that place we'd shared, feeling like a stranger. The pictures on the wall of us smiling at a beat, the couch where we'd binge-watched shows, the kitchen table where we used to have pancakes on Sunday mornings. It all felt haunted, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. I packed my clothes and important papers, leaving anything that didn't matter. I found a stuffed toy. He'd won for me at a carnival once and felt a pang of sadness, but I left it, deciding I didn't want memories of him. I left the key on the table and walked out. Part of me expected to feel triumphant, but mostly I felt hollow. That was the day I cut ties, not just physically, but emotionally. I decided if he wanted to keep texting or calling, that was on him, but I wasn't going to respond. He tried. Oh, did he try? Accusing me of being dramatic, then apologizing, then calling me names. It was a cycle. I was done. Still, it wasn't easy. I spent weeks crashing at Dana's, trying to figure out my next move. My job was okay, but not stable enough to let me get a nice place on my own. My heart felt like a raw wound. I told Dana everything, including my guilt over the harshness of my words. Sometimes in the quiet of night, I questioned whether I'd gone too far. Then I'd recall the heartbreak, the disrespect, the way he tried to mold me, and I'd remind myself, telling the truth isn't cruelty, it's honesty. He never loved me, not the real me. I was a mirror he liked to see his own superiority in. A month later, I found a tiny studio for rent in a less glitzy part of town. It wasn't much, but it had big windows overlooking a scruffy courtyard, and I felt a shred of hope. I moved in with my meager savings and a borrowed futon. It was lonely, but I threw myself into writing. In every free moment, trying to process my turmoil. Memories of Eric haunted, the good ones and the bad. I replayed our early days, the laughter, how safe I'd once felt in his arms. Then I'd replay the cruelty, the heartbreak, and remind myself why I had to. Healing is never a straight path. Some days I felt free. Other days I missed him, or missed the idea of who I thought he was. He tried to reach me again a few months later, after I'd settled into my new place. I remember seeing his name flash on my phone and feeling my stomach drop. Against my better judgment, I answered. He was quiet for a moment, then launched into how he'd been thinking about what I said. How maybe I was right about certain things, but also that I'd been unfair, that I didn't understand the pressure he was under, that his flirting wasn't a big deal. I listened in stunned silence, realizing he still didn't get it. He ended with, "Can we meet for coffee? I just want to talk." My chest tightened. Part of me wanted closure, but another part of me knew coffee would lead nowhere health. So I said, "I think we've said enough," and hung up. Little by little, I rebuilt my life. I took on more responsibilities at work eventually, switching to a different department where they valued my creativity. I made new friends, kept in close contact with Dana, and started going to open mic nights reading my poetry out loud for the first time since college. Each step felt precarious, but it was mine to take, unshackled from anyone else's expectations. Sometimes people asked why I was single, and I'd just smile and say I was focusing on myself for a while, which was true. I had no interest in diving into another relationship until I figured out who I was without someone dictating it to me. I'd like to say I never thought of Eric again, but that would be a lie. The memory of him lingered in small, unexpected moments. When I saw a certain brand of whiskey at the store, or passed by the building where his firm was located, the old anxiety would flare, reminding me of the nights I waited for him to come home, the arguments in the kitchen, the scornful looks from his parents. But each time, I grounded myself in the knowledge that I'd broken free. I'd allowed myself the gift of honesty, even if it came out in a savage burst. Over time, I started sharing bits of the story online, in anonymous posts, just to vent. People responded with empathy and their own tales of heartbreak. That's where I realized how universal this kind of toxicity can be, how many people endure relationships where they feel stifled and belittled. Telling my story helped me heal. The moment I typed out the words, I'd said to Eric, "You never loved me. You only ever loved yourself in my reflection." I felt a shiver. It was like releasing a demon from my chest. Comments flooded in from strangers telling me I was strong, that he deserved it, that I'd done the right thing. Maybe those were just anonymous internet voices, but they gave me the confidence to keep going. One day, about a year later, I got a call from an unknown number. It turned out to be Jessica, of all people, the coworker Eric had been flirting with. She'd found my number somehow, said she felt weird calling me, but needed advice. She'd been in a relationship with Eric and was now experiencing the same emotional manipulation, the same belittling remarks. She told me he'd even used the same lines on her about growing up and being more polished. My heart sank. I had this mental image of him repeating the same patterns with a new victim. I told her everything, what I'd been through, how I'd finally broken it off. She started crying, thanked me, said she was going to leave him. We parted on a bittersweet note, both of us battered by the same man's narcissism. That phone call was the final piece I needed to banish any lingering guilt. I realized he might never change, that maybe some people are just wired to feed on control. But it wasn't my problem anymore, and that was liberating. I hung up, took a long, shaky breath, and decided to write about it all in a single, unflinching piece. That piece turned into something like a personal essay. I didn't name him, didn't name the companies or cities, but I bared my soul about how I lost myself trying to please someone who could never truly appreciate me for me. And I ended it with the line that set me free. What's funny is that the piece resonated with more people than I ever imagined. I got emails from readers who recognized themselves or their exes in my story. They said reading it gave them the courage to speak their own truths. And that's when I knew that those brutal words I said on that snowy balcony weren't just an ending. They were a beginning. Maybe not for Eric, but for me and for anyone else who needed permission to be honest, no matter how painful it might be. Sometimes I still get nightmares about him, twisted dream versions of our arguments, or illusions of him showing up at my door. But I wake up and remind myself that I'm no longer that person trapped. Under his control, I'm free. And yeah, it's scary how a single sentence can burn down an entire relationship in one night. But it can also illuminate show you who you've become, and who you could be once you walk away from the flames. Looking back, I see all the red flags the controlling nature, the constant put-downs, the blame shifting. I should have run the first time he suggested I was too childish to be taken. Seriously. But we cling to people, even when they're bad for us, because we think love demands sacrifice. We forget that real love makes us feel safe and valued, not smaller and uncertain. The morning after I finally blew up and left him, I woke on Dana's couch with puffy eyes but a certain steadiness in my breath. I realized I could be alone, and that being alone might actually be better than being with someone who would never truly see me. If I could go back, would I change the way I delivered those words? Maybe. I might have said them more calmly or in private, without a holiday party overhearing. But I wouldn't change their essence because that truth needed to be spoken. And if that makes me seem cruel, heartless, so be it. Sometimes the only way to break a toxic cycle is to lay it all out. No sugarcoating, no gentle disclaimers. Eric eventually moved on, I'm sure. Probably found someone else to impress, to mold, to critique. I hope for her sake he changed, though I doubt it. As for me, I'm finally working on my novel, that dream he once dismissed as childish. I'm not sure if I'll finish it or if it'll see the light of day, but it's mine. My project, my passion. I date occasionally, but I'm quick to walk away at the first sign of manipulation. I have no patience for second-guessing my worth, and life's too short, and I've got too many things I want to do. I still remember his stunned face after I said what I said. I can see it now in my mind, as clear as if it just happened. That mixture of shock and offense, as if he couldn't believe anyone would stand up to him. In that look, there was also a flicker of realization, like part of him knew I was right and it stung. I doubt he'll ever admit it, even to himself, but I believe he recognized a truth about himself in that instant. Whether he chooses to face it or bury it is out of my hands. I guess that's the moral of the story. Sometimes the most brutal words we say to someone else are also the words that set us free. I don't regret speaking them. They saved me, and I hope, in some twisted cosmic sense, they might save him too one day, if he ever decides to face that mirror without needing someone else to provide the perfect reflection. Maybe he'll see the cracks and realize that love is more than seeing your own greatness echoed back. In the end, I walked away with my sense of self finally intact. It hurt like hell to break away from a man who once made me feel like the center of the universe. But illusions shatter, eventually. And once they do, the only question is whether you'll be brave enough to pick up the pieces and forge a new path. I did, and I can tell you, no matter how brutal the words might have been, they were worth saying. If I had to do it all over again, I'd do the same. Because sometimes it takes a harsh truth to break the chains that keep you from becoming the person you're meant to be. It hurts, but it heals. And that's something I can live with for the rest of my life.